Good morning, Venerables. Hope you're fine and ready for a brand new week. The second week of our course called Essence of Buddhadhamma. Well, last week we have looked at Lecture 1, the first part, and now we will move on to finish up Lecture 1. Last week, we started off by looking at MCU grading system, then moving on to course outline, essence of Buddhadhamma, and explanation, Buddhism, the three major traditions, and Buddhism and modern times. Today, we will begin by looking at Dharma, two important aspects, then moving on to Dharma, two kinds of discourses, Dharma, 6 characteristics, Dharma, 6 analogies, and then a reminder of your homework and reflections, which is to be submitted by 14th of September. So now let us take a look at the section, the part 6, Dharma, two important aspects. This is on page 5 of your Lecture 1 notes. So if you have your Lecture 1 notes in front of you, it is on page 5, middle of page 5. If you don't have your Lecture 1 notes with you, it's okay. Just listen carefully and then later on you can review your lecture notes. And this professor, his name is Y. Karunnadasa. He was born in 1934, which means that he's 86 years old now. He is a very well-known Sri Lankan Buddhist scholar. He received his Bachelor of Arts from University of Ceylon, now known as Buddhadhamma, in 1958, and then received his PhD from the University of London in 1963. Since then, he has taught in many universities around the world. He is now Emeritus Professor of the University of Kelaniya, UOK, Sri Lanka, and he has taught at the University of Hong Kong Center for Buddhist Studies for many, many years. And he's very well known for his book called Early Buddhist Teachings, The Middle Position in Theory and Practice. So this is the cover of the book. And in this book, he talks about two important aspects of the Dharma. So let us take a look at it. He says that the Dharma is not a divine revelation, but a discovery. He said that the Buddha did not attribute the authorship of what he had discovered through supreme human effort to a higher source, to a God. The best way to understand what the Buddha taught is as a discovery through supreme human effort. What is important is not the historicity of the discoverer, who is the Buddha, but the veracity and the validity of the discovery, which is the Dharma. So what he's saying here is that, the Buddha's teachings, the Buddha did not say that his teachings come from a God, from a higher authority, but his teachings are discovered through his own effort, through human effort. So what is important is not so much of all the historical facts of the Buddha, but how true, how valid are his teachings. Okay, so his teachings are not a divine revelation, not from God, but it is a discovery. And if we follow the Buddha's teachings, we can also discover the truth, the validity of the teachings, the Dharma. The Buddha himself says that he depends on the Dharma, honors the Dharma, is respectful and deferential to the Dharma, considers the Dharma and as his banner and standard, and the Dharma as his overlord. What the Buddha told Ananda, his close disciple, we can see in this picture here, a few days before he passed away, he said, Ananda, the doctrine and discipline which I've taught and enjoined is to be your teacher after my passing. So here, the Buddha says that, the teachings are the most important. And so all of us have to depend on the teachings. All of us have to respect the teachings and follow the teachings. Yeah. So the Buddha said, it is okay after I pass away, even though I'm not around, but as long as you follow my teachings, the doctrine, right, the sutra, and the discipline that I teach you, then you will be fine. So because of the pivotal role assigned to the Dharma, the Buddha recognizes that others too can present the Dharma. He encourages his disciples to elaborate on the Dharma. He expects his disciples not only to correctly understand and disseminate the Dharma, but also to be able to refute with good reasons any doctrinal misinterpretations. So here, the Buddha emphasizes the central role, the importance of his teachings, of the Dharma. And because it is so important, every one of us, if we learn and understand the Dharma well, we can also teach the Dharma. So he asks us to learn the Dharma well, to understand it correctly, and then after that, to teach and explain to other people. And if other people have wrong understandings of the Dharma, we must correct them. We must rectify them. Okay? So these are the ideas presented under this section known as not a divine revelation, but a discovery. And here on the right, we have the connected discourses of the Buddha, one of the sutras in the basket of sutras, right? His teachings, his doctrines. Now, another important aspect of the Dharma, scholar Karunadasa tells us, is the purpose and presentation. We must be aware of the purpose and presentation of the Dharma. So he goes on to say that the Dharma is for the purpose of realization and not to be grasped as a theory. It is a means to an end. The Dharma has only relative value relative to the realization of the goal. In the parable of the raft, the Buddha compared his doctrine to a raft. As the Chinese Buddhist saying goes, the Dharma is like a finger pointing to the moon. So here, the Buddha tells us that, his teachings, we are supposed to use his teachings to train ourselves and to realize the truth of the teachings. We should not grasp and understand the teachings only as book knowledge, only as a theory, only as a concept. Therefore, his teachings is only a means, and the goal is, of course, Nibbana. The goal is realization. So the teachings is important as far as it helps us to reach the goal of enlightenment. So in the parable of the raft, on the left we see the picture of a raft, right? Which brings us from one shore of the river to the other shore of the river. He says that his teachings are like a raft. So right now we are in this world, we follow his teachings, we are like sitting on the raft, and then the raft will bring us to the other shore, which is the shore of enlightenment. And of course, once we reach the shore of enlightenment, we let go of the raft, right? We don't carry the raft wherever we go anymore. Okay, so it is not to be cling on just for knowledge. It is supposed to help us towards the goal of Nirvana. So another Chinese Buddhist saying goes, the Dharma is like a finger pointing to the moon. So the moon is Nibbana, is enlightenment. So all the different teachings of the Buddha, the different aspects of the Dharma are all like fingers pointing to the moon. We do not cling on to the fingers, right? We want to reach the moon, Nibbana. So the Dharma as a means can be presented in many different ways, from many different perspectives. Buddhism avoids absolutism and dogmatism. There's no one absolutist way of presenting the Dharma that must be dogmatically adhered to. So here, the Buddha tells us that, his teachings, it is all right to present it in different ways, in different perspectives, because people are different, societies are different, our understandings are different, our levels of knowledge are different. So there's just no one way of presenting the Dharma. Yeah, we must be flexible, open-minded, and use skillful means to present the Dharma. And so, if the Dharma can be presented from many different perspectives, this is because the Dharma is not actuality as such, but a description of the nature of actuality. The nature of actuality that has been presented within a conceptual theoretical framework through the symbolic medium of language. So here, we understand that the Buddha's teaching, the Dharma, it can be delivered in different ways, yeah, because the Dharma is not the truth itself. The Dharma is just a description of the truth. Yeah, it provides a conceptual, a theoretical framework of knowledge using language to help us understand the truth, but the teaching is not the truth itself. As such, there can be more than one conceptual or theoretical model encapsulating the nature of reality. The validity of each will be determined by its ability to take us to the goal, from bondage to freedom, from ignorance to wisdom, from our present predicament to final liberation or freedom. So, because the Dharma is just a description of reality, there can be many different ways, many different theories, many different concepts to describe this reality. So as to which concepts, which theories we use when we teach to people, it depends on the people that we are teaching, on their levels, right? So we use the appropriate language, we use the suitable theory and concept to impart the Dharma, the Buddha's teachings, so as to help them to move from ignorance to wisdom, to help them to advance towards the goal of Nibbana. So in this context, the Dharma can also be communicated through a variety of languages. Buddhism does not have a holy language. The Dharma and the language through which it is presented are means to an end, and not the end in itself. So because the Dharma is a description, it is not the truth itself. There's no one language, right? Buddhism does not have one holy sacred language in which we use the teachings. Yeah, it has Pali, it has all kinds of Indo languages, it has Sanskrit, and then when it goes to the different societies and cultures, we all use different languages, right? So it is perfectly fine to use different languages to teach the Dharma. Okay? So this rounds up the section on purpose and presentation. The two important aspects of the Dharma. First of all, not a divine revelation, but a discovery. And second, to understand its purpose and presentation. So on this note, let's move on to take a look at the Dharma in terms of two kinds of discourses. Right? So we're now on page 6, somewhere in the middle of the lecture notes. Here we're saying that there is a distinction. There's a difference drawn out between two kinds of discourses. A discourse whose meaning is already drawn out, this is called nittata, and a discourse whose meaning has to be drawn out, this is called niyatta. So on the left we have a picture of nittata, which is a technical, philosophical kind of language use. And then on the right is niyatta, which is a kind of consensual, transactional language use. So two kinds of discourses, the way of presenting the teachings. So let us talk a little bit about the first one, nittata, or the technical, philosophical aspects. Here, we're saying that statements are to be understood as they stand, as explicit and definitive. It is an expression for philosophical language, the use of impersonal, technical terms to bring out the nature of reality. So, for example, depending on the I and the I object arises I consciousness. The 5 aggregates eat. So when we talk about nitata or technical philosophical language, we're using very precise language to help us understand the teaching, right? So, for instance, instead of saying that I see with my eyes, right? The more technical, precise philosophical language will be depending on the I and the I object arises I consciousness. So instead of saying a person eats, right? The more precise, technical, philosophical way of saying it is the 5 aggregates it. These are just examples, right? Don't worry so much. We will talk about all this in other future lectures. So the first thing to note is that for nitata, it is more precise, technical, philosophical language. And then what is neyata, consensual or transactional? Here we are referring to statements which should be interpreted to fall in line with the explicit and the definitive, an expression for the use of conventional and transactional terms in ordinary parlance, in ordinary context, in presenting the Buddhist teachings. So as we said, here, this is the kind of language that we normally use, right? In our daily world, we say, I see with my eyes, right? So this is consensual, this is transactional. Consensual meaning we all agree on the meaning, right? Of how we communicate. Transactional is communication. That we agree on this way of communication. In English, we say that I see with my eyes. In your different languages, you will use different modes of language to say so, right? And then if I'm eating, I say a person. If I see a person eating, I say a person eats. Yeah. So this is ordinary language that we use in our ordinary world. So more explanation on the use of language. However, if we use only technical philosophical language, that means nitata, just because it is the right language, it will fail to communicate what we want to communicate. Conventions require the use of such expressions as I see, I hear, and so on, as long as one does not imagine independent agents corresponding to them, such expressions are valid. So here we are saying that, in our daily life, we cannot use very technical philosophical language when we talk to each other, right? We cannot say that depending on the I and the I object arises I consciousness. Instead, we say, I see with my eyes. We cannot say all the time that, oh, the 5 aggregates are eating, instead of saying that I am eating, or you are eating, or he is eating, right? So in daily life, we need to be flexible to use the kind of language that we all agree on, that we all have a consensus on. So on the use of language, the Buddha, when he was teaching Chitta, the householder, says, these Chitta are names, samana, expressions, niruti, turns of speech, vohara, and designations, panati, in common use in the world. And of these, the Tathagata, the Buddha, makes use indeed, but is not led astray by them, neither clinging to knowledge, nor overstepping the golden mean. Neither clinging to language, nor overstepping, this is the golden mean. So here the Buddha is teaching to a householder whose name is Chitta. He says that, all the languages that we use, right, whether they're names, they're expressions, they're different forms of speech, there are different terms. We just use them in the world. We have to use them in the world because this is the way we understand the language is to be used. But having said so, we are not confused by them, right? We know that this language is used only as tools for communication in this mundane world. Yeah, we should not grasp and think that the language that we use, this language that we use, is the truth, right? We should not cling on. We should not over-exaggerate the importance of the language. It is just a tool, a means to an end, right? So this is what he calls the golden mean, yeah, the middle road. So in this context, the two kinds of statement, that is nitata and niyata, are equally valid, provided they are understood in the proper context. The Buddha does not say that one kind of statement is higher or lower than the other, but that the two statements should not be confused because they need to be understood in two different contexts. We make a mistake only if we interpret one as if it were the other. So the Buddha tells us that we must be pragmatic, we must be practical, right? When we're living in this world, when we communicate with people, we must use ordinary language, right? If we are teaching the Dharma and we need to use a more technical philosophical language, then we use more technical philosophical language. So both languages are fine. It is not that one is better than the other. It depends on the context, on who we are talking to, and then we use the right kind of language, skillful means, yeah? But we must not confuse, right, on the kind of language that we use in ordinary world, and then the kind of more technical philosophical language, which is more precise in describing reality, right? So on the left picture here, we see, our world, our mundane world is like a movie, right? So in the movie, people talk in different ways. So if we are participating in a movie, we also talk following their ways. But in reality, on the right, we are not a permanent self, right? That everything is changing. Yeah, so we must not confuse the two as if everything is permanent when everything is impermanent. Okay, so one we use in ordinary life, and then one we use to describe the truth in more precise, technical, philosophical context. All right, so this is the two kinds of discourses for the Dharma. We talk about the nitata, technical philosophical aspects, and then the niyata, consensual transactional aspect, which is used in daily life, and we must not confuse the two kinds of aspects. Okay, now let's just move on to part 8. Here, we are looking at 6 characteristics of the Dharma taught by the Buddha. And for Pali chanting, we do this every day, right? In our chanting, we talk about these 6 characteristics of the Dharma. So what are these 6 characteristics? Let us take a closer look. So the first characteristic is that the Dharma is well expounded, svakata. We are on page 7 of the lecture 1 notes now. If you're following, if not, it's all right. Just listen, and then you can look at your lecture notes later. Here, the Buddha says that he does not have the closed feast of the teachers, acharya mutti, that is, teachers who have secret teachings. The more one elaborates the Buddha's doctrine and discipline, the more it shines, and not when it is concealed. The Dharma is not confined to an elitist class, but is for the benefit and happiness of the many. So here the Buddha is telling us that, oh, you know, all the teachings that the Buddha knows that are important teachings, he has taught us, right? He doesn't have any secret teachings that he is keeping and not telling us. So he says that when we understand the teachings and we can explain them well and we can teach them well, then the teachings will shine, right? Then the sutras, the discourses, the discipline, the ethical disciplines, the ethics, the morality that he teaches will shine. The teachings are not supposed to be kept for ourselves only. They're not supposed to be hidden, not supposed to be concealed. And the teaching is for everybody. It is not for any specific class of people, not just for the high class or for the rich or for the intelligent, but to benefit everybody, to create happiness for everybody. Okay? So because of this, the Dhamma is well expounded. Therefore, in addressing the first 60 disciples of the Buddha who became arahats, the Buddha exhorted, encouraged them to spread the Dhamma. For the blessing of the many folk, for the happiness of the many folk, out of compassion for the world, for the welfare, the blessing, the happiness of Deva, gods, and men. Let not two of you go by one way. So his first 60 disciples, after they become arahant, the Buddha told them, right? Yes, now that you understand, you have realized the truth. Now go. In different directions. Make sure you go in different directions. Do not go in the same way. Yeah, in different directions. 60 of you, so go in different 60 directions and teach to the people you come into contact with for their blessing, for their happiness, for their welfare, for their happiness, right? Whether they are men or women or gods, yeah, go teach them. Okay, so this is what he says. There's no adequate evidence yet to show that any religious teacher during or before the time of the Buddha resorted to missionary activity. Buddhism could therefore be considered the first missionary religion in the world. So, because he asks all his first 60 disciples who became arahants to go and teach. The scholar Karunadasa argues that perhaps in this context, Buddhism could be considered as the first religion in the world that teaches, that encourages people to teach, that encourages disciples to teach to other people. Okay? So the second characteristic is the Dhamma is visible here and now, sandittika, right? Actually, these next three characteristics of the Dhamma, there are three ways of looking at it as something that can be personally verified here and now. So when we talk about visible here and now, sandittika, we mean that the Dhamma can be experientially validated and authenticated here and now. So what we are saying is that when the Buddha presents his teachings, the teachings is to help us understand everything as it is right now, right? It is not the teachings about long time ago, about what will happen in future, but right now. So if we follow the teachings right now, then we can experience it. It is like a scientific experiment, right? If you follow the science teacher's instructions and do this and do that, and then the outcome, we can see it, we can experience it. So this is what we mean by experiencing it here and now, right? Visible means can be seen, can be experienced here and now. We can know whether it is true or not. This is what we mean by experientially validating and authenticating it here and now. Okay? So we ourselves can check whether the teachings are true here and now. So the third characteristic is that the Dhamma does not involve time, akalika. Does not involve time means that the Dhamma can be understood in living immediacy without going to the past or to the future. So this point is related to the earlier point about visible here and now. So the emphasis is on here and now. The emphasis is on understanding the Dharma now, right? So it is not about the Dharma being relevant only in the past or relevant only in the future and nothing to do with us now, right? It is not like just learning history in the past or speculating about what is to come, making predictions in the future, but the Dharma is all relevant. It is all very useful for all of us right now, whatever we're doing, this moment. That's why Buddhist teachings, right, always talk about living in the moment, experiencing the moment. So it is not about the past, it is not about the future, it is about this very moment, this here and now. Okay, the fourth characteristic, the Dharma invites one to come and see it. Ehi pasika. Come and see means that the Dharma invites us not to come and accept it, but to come and examine it before we decide to follow it. The Dharma does not encourage our accepting and following it on blind faith. Now here we're saying that, if somebody is interested in understanding the Buddha's teachings and hearing the Buddha's teachings, we say, come and see, right? Come and hear. That's a ehipasika. But coming and hearing does not mean that we force you to accept the Buddha's teachings blindly, right? We encourage you to come and listen and then to think about it and then to see whether it is true or not true, whether it is acceptable or not acceptable. So this is what we mean by come and see, come and listen, come and examine, come and explore, come and investigate, come and think, come and evaluate, right? The Buddha's teaching is not based on blind faith. Yeah. So this is what we can talk about when we say the Dharma invites one to come and see it. Okay. So we've covered 4 characteristics. Let us move on to the 5th characteristic. So here, the Dharma leads onward to the goal. Opanayika. So leading onward means that when practiced, the Dharma takes us towards the goal. That is, towards the realization of Nibbana, the complete emancipation from all suffering. So as we mentioned earlier on in the lecture, the Dharma is a means to an end, right? It's a raft. It's a raft to the other shore of Nibbana. It is a finger pointing to the moon, right? So here we are emphasizing that the Dharma is leading us towards the goal of Nibbana. So if we understand it well and we practice it correctly, then the Dharma, the teachings will take us to the shore of Nibbana to help us to realize Nibbana, to help us achieve complete freedom, complete liberation from all suffering. Emancipation means liberation, means freedom, okay? Yeah, from all, in our context, in the Buddhist context, from all suffering. Freedom, emancipation, liberation from all suffering. So such a peaceful state of meditation, right? We have here this picture, the Buddha meditating. And then the 6th characteristic is the Dharma is to be realized for themselves by the wise. Pachatam veditabo vinuhi. To be realized for themselves by the wise means that the Dharma is to be directly and personally experienced and realized for themselves by the wise. To be realized means to be understood through free wisdom, not through knowledge or accumulated memory. So again, here we are emphasizing that the Dharma is not teachings just in terms of book knowledge, right? Just something that we want to grasp, to cling at, to be very proud of, that we know so much knowledge, that we can memorize so many teachings, that we can memorize so many rituals, so many chanting. All this helps, but they are not the ultimate goal. The teachings, the Dharma, should be understood should be practiced and understood and realized. Yeah, if we can realize, practice well and realize them, then we are wise, right? If we just have book knowledge, we can teach well, but we do not follow the teachings, we do not understand them, but we teach them just like a parrot, copying what other people say, then that's not very useful, right? We should understand them, practice them, and then experience them, right? Then we will be wise. Hence, the Dharma is to be realized for themselves by the wise. Once we practice, we realize it, we become the wise. So it must be understood through wisdom, not just book knowledge, right? Not just based on whatever teachings that we can memorize. So here, let us take a look at the dialogue between Bhadraka, the head man, and the Buddha about the Four Noble Truths, which is, of course, a core teaching which we'll talk about in later lectures. So when the Buddhas came across this headman, this chief of a village by the name of Bhadraka, he tells him about the Four Noble Truths. So the 6 specific characteristics of the Dharma are clearly illustrated in a dialogue between Bhadraka, the headman, and the Buddha about the Four Noble Truths. So Bhadraka, he wanted to know how he could understand the origin and the passing away of suffering. Then the Buddha explained to the headman with many examples how all suffering arises with self-centered craving as its cause, and how all suffering ceases with the cessation of its cause, which is self-centered craving. The Buddha asked the headman to apply this principle, which he had seen here and now, which he has fathomed immediately, to the past and the future as well. Okay, so this Bhadraka, he wants to know, how did suffering come about, and how can suffering be get rid of? How can suffering be get rid of? So the Buddha goes on to teach Bhadraka. He says that the root of suffering is craving, right? Self-centered craving, selfish craving. This is why suffering arises. This is how suffering begins. And how do we stop suffering? Well, if we stop craving. So if we apply this principle, we can do it right here and now, right? And once we understand it right here and now, we can also understand why in the past craving caused suffering. And when we have no more craving, craving also stops. And he says that this principle will also apply in the future, right? That in the future, people who have craving will also suffer, and people who can stop their craving will not suffer. Okay? So, in this context, from this perspective, all the teachings of the Buddha are related to 2 themes: suffering and the cessation and the end of suffering. It is these 2 themes that we find in the Four Noble Truths, which presents the essence, the core of the Buddha's teachings. And it is by penetrating the Four Noble Truths that we can realize happiness at different levels: personal and family, social and societal, worldly and spiritual, and relative mundane, and ultimate or supramundane. So what the dialogue between Bhadraka and the Buddha clearly demonstrates is that the Four Noble Truths can be penetrated here and now. All right? So the Buddha says that, all his teachings, right? Even though there's so many teachings that I've given, but there are 2 main themes. First is about suffering, and second is about how to end suffering. And this is very well explained in the Four Noble Truths, which we'll look at in future lectures. So if we can understand and practice according to the Four Noble Truths, then we can be happy at different levels, right? In our personal life, we can be happy. In our family life, we can be happy. In society, we can be happy. We can be happy in this world. We can be happy in spiritually and Ultimately, we can be happy not only in this mundane relative world, but we can achieve, realize happiness of the ultimate supra-mundane. Okay? So all these things can be practiced every moment of our existence here and now. So we have finished part 8 on the 6 characteristics of the Dharma. Now let us then move on to the Dharma in terms of 6 analogies. And here the 6 analogies are presented by Bhikkhu Buddhadhamma, who lived from 1906 to 1993. In his book, he actually talks about the 24 dimensions of Dharma, but I'm only selecting 6 dimensions to use as analogies. All right. Bhikkhu Buddhadhamma, he's a very well-known Thai monk scholar. Right. He was ordained at the age of 20, and then after that, he set up a center in the south of Thailand, Surat Thani, known as Chuan Seng, the Garden of Liberation. And he also established an international meditation center, inviting both local Thais as well as people from all over the world to practice meditation. So this center is still around today, and then we can go there and practice, right? They have 10-day retreats at the beginning of every month. So a very famous Thai scholar monk. Okay, so let us take a look at 6 of the 24 dimensions or analogies that he used for the Dharma, for the Buddha's teachings. Well, the first dimension or analogy is the Dharma as an island. So Bhikkhu Buddhadasa tells us that the Dharma is like an oceanic island, very much needed by those adrift in the sea. Mystics in our daily life are like water in a deep sea. Our daily life living is like swimming in the sea, surrounded by all kinds of obstacles from everything we associate with. Spiritual support, like an island, is greatly needed to save us from being adrift aimlessly. Without it, we may do wrong things and drown in our sea of misery. Hence, we need to have our island of spiritual support to save us from the sea of loneliness, frustrations, aimlessness. Okay, so he's saying that, oh, you know, in our daily life, we're living in a sea, right? We have a sea of loneliness. We're very lonely. We're very frustrated. We are not sure what to do in life. So he calls it sea of loneliness, frustrations, and aimlessness. So if we follow the teaching of the Buddha, the Dharma, then the Dharma is like an island in this sea of misery, in this sea of suffering, right? So if we are always taking the island as our refuge, we make our island of ourselves and take it as a refuge in the Buddha's teachings, in the Dharma, then we're fine, even though we're living in this sea of the mundane world. But the Dharma will help us to lead life correctly, will help us to diminish our suffering, and one day to help us be free from our suffering. Okay, so this is what he means by the Dharma as an island. Okay. So the second analogy that he uses is the Dharma as an umbrella. So the Dharma is like an umbrella which can protect us against the rain of our defilements, which pour on our unprotected minds and make us wet, cold, and unhappy. Since rain is a natural phenomenon, it is certain to fall. It is up to us to find something to protect ourselves against it. Otherwise, the rain will harm us, our loved ones, and our belongings. As such, we need to protect ourselves against the rain of defilements with the umbrella of Dharma to save us from being drenched and getting into all kinds of trouble. So here we're saying that, rain. Now it's the rainy season, right? Rain. All this rain is like our defilements. We have all kinds of defilements. We make all kinds of mistakes, and as such, our life is full of suffering, full of misery, right? So the rain of defilements, our cravings, our mistakes, our unwholesomeness, they all make us unhappy, and they all make us suffer. So the Dharma here is like an umbrella. So if we understand the teachings of the Buddha and we practice them, then the teachings will protect us from this rain of our defilements, right? Will protect us from this suffering. And therefore, it is like an umbrella protecting us against all this rain, which makes us wet, cold, and unhappy. So if we live all the time, if we have this umbrella and live all the time under this umbrella, following the teachings of the Buddha, then we will be fine, right? Then we can protect ourselves, our loved ones, and all the people, all the things that we have come into contact with. Okay? So this will help us from being drenched and get into all kinds of trouble. So from an island to an umbrella, now Bhikkhu Buddhadasa tells us that the Dharma is like food, right? The analogy, the dimension of the Dharma as food. When we're hungry, we want food. Since we have both body and mind, we need both material and spiritual food. If we take only material food, we cannot live properly and may succumb to all kinds of mental afflictions. Hence, the Dharma is important as our spiritual food for our spiritual nourishment. Besides quelling our spiritual hunger, the Dharma can also satisfy our physical hunger by protecting us against overeating or eating the wrong kinds of food. In this way, the Dharma can nourish us both spiritually and physically. Okay, so here, Dharma, food. Yeah, our body, of course, whenever we're hungry, when we're tired, we need energy, we want to have food. So physical food, right, like here, satisfy us physically, make us physically full. But because we're body and mind, we also need spiritual food, right? To help us to rectify our mental suffering, our mental afflictions, our mental problems. Okay, so the Dharma here is like spiritual food to nourish us. Just like physical food nourish our body, the Dharma is spiritual food nourish our mind. Now, the Dharma can also nourish our physical body. Why? Because sometimes we come across food that we like very much. We have this intense craving. We become greedy, right? And we eat and eat and eat and eat. Instead, even if though we're full, we overeat. And we overeat, what will happen? We have all kinds of stomach problems, right? We may have indigestion. We may have stomach ache. We may have all kinds of stomach problems. So if we follow the teachings of the Dharma, it will, in this sense, also nourish us physically and nourish us spiritually. All right, so we wouldn't overeat. We wouldn't eat food that are not good for us, for our body, and for our mind. We can watch out for our greed and craving, and then control them, which will benefit us spiritually and physically. Okay? From Dharma as, let us take a look at the Dharma as a weapon. So the Dharma is like a weapon to protect us against our external and internal enemies. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa tells us our external enemies are people who dislike or hate us. Our internal enemies are our defilements. We must always rely on goodness to conquer evil, because this is the right way to use the Dharma as a weapon. Do not use evil to overcome wickedness. triumph over all or enemies by using the Dharma as a weapon that none can oppose or resist. When the Dharma is used, our enemies will be conquered by the power of the Dharma weapon. We will be well liked and well loved. So here, when we talk about the Dharma, we're talking about as a weapon, we're talking about a weapon of peace, of loving kindness, of compassion, of wisdom, right? So here, may all beings abide in peace and equanimity. So if we have this weapon of peace, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom, then we will not be killed by ignorance. We will not be killed by delusion. We will not be killed by our greed. We will not be killed by our anger and hatred. All right? So we may have people who dislike us or hate us. These are our external enemies. Now within our mind, yeah, we also have lots of defilements, lots of unwholesome thoughts. So these are our internal enemies. So as long as we understand and follows the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, then we will be fine, right? Because the Dharma here as a weapon of peace, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom can help us overcome both our internal enemies, the enemies of our mind, and our external enemies, people who dislike or hate us. So in this process, we will be well liked and well loved by people who were originally our enemies, and we will be able to discipline and get rid of our unwholesomeness and become wholesome, likable, lovable people. All right? The Dharma as a weapon. On to the Dharma as music and poetry. Well, music and poetry, because Buddhadhamma tells us, refer to pleasing sounds and words that satisfy us auditorily, just as beautiful things or persons satisfy us visually. People who appreciate auditory pleasure will find the music and words of the Dharma most pleasing. The Buddha said that the Dharma and the sublime life have beauty and sweetness from the beginning, through the middle, and to the end. People who are attached merely to food, sensuality, fame, money, and worldly properties will not be able to appreciate the beauty and melodiousness of the Dharma as the ultimate music and poetry. So here, Bhikkhu Buddhadhamma tells us that, of course, music is so beautiful to listen to. Poetry is so beautiful to listen to, right? Words and lyrics, songs and writings. So we all have our favorite music, we all have our favorite poetry. But the most beautiful of music and poetry is actually the Dharma, right? Buddha's teachings. If we listen to them properly, understand them wisely, with compassion and with loving kindness, we know that it is so beautiful and so sweet from the middle from the beginning through the middle to the end. And so we must learn how to appreciate the Dharma, how to listen to the Dharma as beautiful music and poetry. And this will take us away from the mundane world of food, sensuality, fame, and other worldly properties, and move us to the beauty, to the bliss of Nibbana. Okay, so here we have a book by Ian McCrory on the reflections of the Dharma. The moon appears when the water is still, when our mind is still, like the water, the moon, Nibbana, will appear. Finally, let us take a look at the sixth analysis used by Bhikkhu Buddhadhamma. The Dharma is a garden of flowers. The Dharma is like a garden full of blooming beautiful flowers, which can be picked at our own preference. Each aspect of the Dharma can please us as does each kind of flower by its nature and characteristics. The Dharma consists of innumerable categories, often mentioned as 84,000, which can be compared to 84,000 or innumerable types of flowers available for our choice. If we have wisdom, we can enjoy ourselves picking the wonderful variety of flowers, always immersed in the fascinating splendor of these dharmic flowers. So here we have a beautiful autumn garden in Japan, Kyoto, right? Autumn season. And the Dhamma is like a garden of flowers, right? We talk about 84,000 types of teachings, which means that there's many types of teachings. We talk about in our earlier part 1 lecture, the Theravada Mahayana Vajrayana, right? Because of diversity of people, we have diversity of teachings. So it is up to us to pick whichever kinds of flowers in this beautiful garden of Dharma to suit our taste, to suit our character, to suit our personality, to suit our affinity, as long as we can use them wisely and help us to live wisely, to realize wisdom, to realize Nibbana. Okay, so these are the 6 analogies used by Bhikkhu Buddhadhamma. So how can we identify the Dhamma? Coming to the final part of our lecture. So in conclusion, how can we identify the Dhamma? How can we separate it from what it is not? We can ask the following questions. Is it about suffering and the end of suffering? Does it teach us to avoid evil, to do good, and to purify the mind? Does it help us to move away from unwholesomeness to wholesomeness? Does it help us to move away from self-centeredness to selflessness? Does it help us to move towards realizing Nibbana, the final goal of the Buddha's teachings? So if they do so, then they are the Dharma, right? This question helps us to identify the Dharma. Well, Nibbana has been described in many ways from many perspectives, but its most standard definition is the cessation, the end of craving or great attachment, the end of aversion, anger or hatred, and the end of delusion or ignorance, right? So these are the 3 basic causes of all moral ethical evil, because all forms of moral ethical evil are traceable to them. Therefore, when all these 3 morally ethical and wholesome factors are eliminated, all defilements come to an end. When craving, aversion, and delusion cease, the corresponding positive counterparts emerge. Absence of craving, aversion, and delusion positively means the presence of generosity, loving kindness, and wisdom. So this gives us a very clear indication as to how we should separate the Dharma from what it is not. Whatever leads us to the cessation, to the end of craving, aversion, and delusion is the Dharma. Whatever leads us away from it is not the Dharma. So this criterion of what is or what is not the Dharma is ultimately pragmatic, not textual, although of course it occurs in Buddhist text. So here we talk about teachings, right? The Dharma, if they help us to avoid evil, do good, purify the mind, it's the correct teaching. If it helps us to move away from unwholesomeness to wholesomeness, from self-centeredness to selflessness, if it helps us to reach the goal of Nibbana, then all these are the correct teachings, the Dharma, right? So they are not just in terms of book knowledge, but they are in terms of practice and realization. Okay, so now let us end with a story of Venerable Zhen Yan, who was born in 1937, and so she's right now 83 years old, right? And she's the founder of this Buddhist Tzu or Compassionate Relief Foundation, started in 1966. So here we're using her as an example of how an ordinary person, right? A nun, yeah, ultimately proceeds, yeah, when she comes across the Buddha's teachings, when she understands them and practices them, she brings so much good to so many people. Okay, so she's the founder of Buddhist Compassionate Relief Foundation, and she's known as the Mother Teresa of Taiwan, right? She became a nun at the age of 25, and this is her teacher, very well known, Venerable Master Ing Shun. Yeah. So she says that she came across 2 examples in her life which inspired her to set up this charity foundation, right, known as Tzu. First was that she came across Catholic nuns, and Catholic nun says that that she came across with told her that, oh, you know, Buddhist teachings, they are very profound. But do they bring good to ordinary people? You know, like us, Catholic Church, we help people around the world by building schools and hospitals. And so, what about Buddhism? Has it done very much in that sense? Then another incident in her life, she went to hospital and she saw this poor Taiwanese woman, yeah, because she could not have money. She was not allowed to stay in the hospital. She was pregnant, and then she had a miscarriage. So she was filled with, she felt very sorry for this poor woman. And then through these two incidents in her life, she tells herself that she must do something for the good of the people. Buddhism must do something for the good of the people. So she set up this Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation in 1966, yeah, to do charity. So from this very humble beginning, yeah, so this is her, Venerable Zhen Yan, 台湾最美丽的人. She's the Mother Teresa. She's considered to be the most beautiful person in Taiwan. So from her humble beginnings in 1966, the picture on the top is her headquarters of Compassionate Relief Foundation, Tzu Chi Foundation, set up in 1966 and grew over the years with hospitals, with nursing colleges now. And then it has branches all over the world. So for instance, here we have Yayasan Buddha Tzu Chi branch in Indonesia, right? So because Tzu Chi is a charity organization, it could be set up even in Muslim countries like Indonesia and and Malaysia too, right? Where there are Muslim majorities. Okay. So her purpose of this organization is to bring relief, charity, whenever there are natural disasters. So here we have Tzu Chi followers bringing relief donations to the people of Haiti, yeah, who suffered from disasters. And then here, Tzu Chi has its own TV station known as 大爱, big love, right? Television to impart the Buddhist teachings to help to make this world a more compassionate place. So this is the story of Venerable Zhen Yan, yeah, how she's inspired by the Buddhist teachings to set up this Tzu Chi Foundation, which now has branches all over the world, including Singapore and probably in your countries too. Yeah, good to do charity for the people. So the final part is just a reminder of your homework and reflections. One to be submitted by 14th of September. So read chapter 1 from the book Buddhism for Beginners, Buddhism for Today. That's the name of that's the title of the chapter. And then read chapter 1 of the Tree of Enlightenment. The title of this chapter is called Buddhism, a More. And then discuss the following questions, right? Write a short essay topic. Compare and contrast the chapters 1 of Buddhism for Beginners and the Tree of Enlightenment. And this short essay will represent 5% of your total course grade. Now, which of this, in what ways are the chapter 1s of these two books similar and different? Which of the two chapters do you prefer? Why? If you have additional views on the topic based on whatever knowledge you have, please present them too. Write a short essay about 300 to 500 words and email to me by 14th of September. So when writing your essay, make sure you do not commit plagiarism. All right, so this is the end of our lecture 1. I hope you find it interesting and useful, and we will move on to lecture 2 shortly. Okay, thank you very much.